The alien fleet had barely started moving toward Earth when something impossible happened. Every single communication device on every single ship in the hegemony fleet suddenly crackled to life at exactly the same moment. Not just the main communication systems, but everything. Personal communicators, emergency channels, even the closed military networks that were supposed to be completely secure. The voice that came through was calm and clear, speaking perfect hegemonic standard without even the slightest accent. This was shocking because hegemonic standard was a complex language that took years to master, and no primitive species had ever learned it before first contact. Yet here was a human voice, speaking it like a native. "You have entered the sovereign territory of humanity," the voice said with the kind of quiet confidence that made Admiral Korthvex's blood run cold. "So you have threatened our world and our people. We are giving you one opportunity to withdraw beyond the heliopause and never return. You have 60 minutes to comply. This is your only warning." The transmission cut off as suddenly as it had begun, leaving the alien bridge in stunned silence. Korthvex stared at his communication officer, who was frantically checking every system, trying to figure out how the humans had managed to hack into their networks. But there was no trace of any intrusion, no evidence of any signal being sent to their ships. It was as if the message had simply appeared inside their systems from thin air. What made it even more disturbing was that the message hadn't come from any single location. The fleet sensors showed no transmission source, no radio waves, no quantum communications, nothing. The voice had somehow spoken directly to every communication device across hundreds of ships scattered throughout the asteroid belt, all at the exact same instant. The bridge crew looked at each other with growing unease. How did these primitive humans even know what the heliopause was? That was the boundary where the solar wind from Earth's sun met the cosmic winds from deep space. It marked the true edge of the solar system. Most primitive species didn't even have a name for it, let alone use it as a territorial boundary. Korthvex tried to maintain his composure, but doubt was beginning to creep into his mind. The intelligence reports had said these humans barely had space travel. They were supposed to be using primitive radio waves to communicate with their few pathetic space stations. Yet somehow, they had just demonstrated communication technology that was beyond anything the hegemony possessed. The alien commander's tactical officer was running scan after scan, trying to locate the source of the transmission. Every scan came back empty. It was as if the humans had spoken to them from everywhere and nowhere at the same time. This wasn't just advanced technology. This was something that challenged the very laws of physics as the hegemony understood them. The clock was now ticking. 59 minutes and counting. The alien ships were still accelerating toward Earth when every screen, speaker, and communication device throughout the entire hegemony fleet suddenly lit up at once. It happened so fast that the bridge crews didn't even have time to react. 1 second they were monitoring their approach. The next second a human voice was speaking directly to them through systems that should have been completely impossible to access. The voice belonged to a woman, and she spoke with the kind of calm authority that made seasoned military officers pay attention. What shocked Admiral Korthvex most wasn't just that she was speaking perfect hegemonic standard, but that she was speaking it better than most of his own officers. Her pronunciation was flawless, her grammar perfect, and she used formal military terminology that even some hegemony commanders struggled with. "For you have entered the sovereign territory of humanity," she said, and there was no fear in her voice, no pleading, no desperation. Just a simple statement of fact, delivered with absolute confidence. "You have threatened our world and our people. We are giving you one opportunity to withdraw beyond the heliopause and never return. You have 60 minutes to comply. This is your only warning." The transmission lasted exactly 37 seconds, but those 37 seconds changed everything. When it ended, the silence on the alien bridges was deafening. Hundreds of the galaxy's most experienced warriors sat staring at their screens, trying to process what had just happened. Korthvex's communication specialist was a genius with technology, someone who had cracked the security systems of dozens of different species. He was frantically running diagnostics, checking every possible way the humans could have accessed their networks. But every scan came back the same way. Impossible. There was no trace of any external signal reaching their ships, no evidence of any hack or intrusion. The message had simply appeared inside their communication systems, as if it had always been there. What made it even more unsettling was the timing. Every single ship in the fleet had received the message at exactly the same instant, despite being spread across millions of kilometers of space. Even light took time to travel such distances, but this transmission had somehow reached every vessel simultaneously. It defied the basic laws of physics that governed all known communication technology. The tactical officer was running deep scans of Earth and the surrounding space, looking for the source of the transmission. His instruments showed nothing unusual. No massive radio transmitters, no quantum communication arrays, no exotic energy signatures. Just a quiet blue planet with some primitive satellites and space stations that barely had enough power to communicate with each other, let alone project a signal across the solar system to an alien fleet. But the most disturbing part wasn't the technology. It was the tone. The human woman had spoken to them like she held all the cards, like she was the one in control of the situation. She hadn't begged or negotiated or tried to buy time. She had simply stated her terms and started a countdown. 59 minutes and 38 seconds remaining. Admiral Korthvex's laughter echoed across the bridge of his flagship, a sound that his crew knew well. It was the same dismissive chuckle he made whenever a primitive species tried to threaten the mighty hegemony fleet. To him, the human warning was nothing more than a desperate bluff from a species that had just realized they were about to be conquered. 60 minutes, he said to his officers, still chuckling. These humans actually think they can give us an ultimatum. They don't even have proper warships, and they're trying to order around the greatest military force in the galaxy. His bridge crew nodded in agreement, sharing their commander's amusement. After all, they had conquered hundreds of worlds. This was just another Tuesday for them. The admiral gave the order to continue the advance. All across the fleet, massive engines roared to life as hundreds of warships accelerated toward the small blue planet. Weapon systems that could crack moons in half began charging their energy banks. The sound of humming plasma cannons filled the ships as crews prepared for what they assumed would be a very short battle. Landing craft started dropping from the belly of the larger ships like deadly insects falling from a tree. Each one carried enough firepower to level a city and was filled with soldiers who had never lost a battle. The plan was simple: overwhelm Earth's defenses with sheer numbers, land troops in major population centers, and accept humanity's surrender within hours. But as the alien fleet moved closer to Earth, something strange began to happen. The human space stations that had been buzzing with activity just minutes before started going dark one by one. Their lights dimmed, their communication signals faded, and their engines went silent. It was as if someone was turning off switches across the entire human space presence. The International Space Station, which had been orbiting Earth peacefully for decades, suddenly stopped transmitting. The lunar research bases that humans had built on the Moon went quiet. Even the small mining operations in the asteroid belt shut down their operations, and their crews seemed to simply vanish. To Admiral Korthvex, this looked exactly like what he expected from a primitive species. The humans had realized they were hopelessly outmatched and were abandoning their positions rather than face certain death. It was actually quite smart of them, he thought. At least they understood when they were beaten. Earth's communication networks followed the same pattern. The constant chatter of radio signals, television broadcasts, and internet traffic that had been streaming from the planet suddenly began to fade. Military frequencies went silent first, then civilian channels, then even the automated systems that controlled things like air traffic and power grids. From space, Earth looked like it was slowly falling asleep. City lights dimmed across entire continents. The bright glow of human civilization that had been visible from orbit was gradually fading away. It appeared that humanity was powering down their entire technological infrastructure rather than let it fall into alien hands. The alien bridge crews watched this with satisfaction. This was how intelligent species behaved when faced with impossible odds. They knew when to surrender. The countdown hit zero at exactly 60 minutes, and that's when reality itself seemed to break apart around the alien fleet. Admiral Korthvex was studying his tactical displays when the first impossible thing happened. Space around his ships began to ripple like water, as if someone had thrown a stone into a perfectly still pond. But this wasn't water. This was the vacuum of space, and it wasn't supposed to behave like that. The ripples spread outward from points all around the hegemony fleet, creating visible distortions that made the stars behind them dance and twist. The alien sensors went crazy, their readings jumping between numbers that made no sense. Energy signatures that shouldn't exist were appearing everywhere at once. Then the abandoned human space stations came back to life, but not in any way the aliens had ever seen before. What the hegemony had dismissed as primitive orbital habitats suddenly blazed with light so bright it hurt to look at directly. But these weren't the crude fusion engines that the intelligence reports had described. These were something completely different. The space around each station began to fold and twist as engines that bent the very fabric of reality itself roared to life. The stations weren't just turning on their lights, they were revealing their true nature. What had looked like simple research facilities and communication relays from a distance were actually massive weapons platforms, disguised to look harmless. As the alien fleet watched in growing horror, the stations began to unfold like deadly flowers blooming in the darkness of space. Sections that had appeared to be solar panels and communication dishes transformed into weapon arrays that made the hegemony's most advanced battleships look like toys. Each platform was easily 10 times larger than Admiral Korthvex's flagship, and there were dozens of them scattered throughout the solar system. But the most shocking transformation was happening to Earth's moon. The ancient, cratered surface that humans had been visiting for barely a century suddenly began to crack open along perfect geometric lines. The cracks spread across the entire lunar surface in a pattern that was clearly artificial, clearly planned, and clearly impossible, given what the hegemony knew about human technology. As the cracks widened, brilliant light began streaming out from inside the moon. Not the reflected sunlight that normally made the moon glow, but something far more intense and alien. The entire satellite was splitting open like a massive flower, revealing that it wasn't just a natural rocky body anymore. The humans had somehow hollowed it out and turned it into the largest weapons platform anyone had ever seen. Layer after layer of lunar rock peeled away to reveal technology that shouldn't exist. Weapon systems that could have destroyed entire star systems, defense shields that could have protected whole galaxies, and at the center of it all, a power source that was making space itself bend and twist around it. The alien crews sat in stunned silence, watching their sensors try to process readings that broke every known law of physics. The humans hadn't abandoned their positions. They had been waiting. The second transmission came through just as clearly as the first, but this time Admiral Korthvex could see who was speaking to him. His main screen flickered to life, showing a simple office that could have been in any government building anywhere on Earth. There were no dramatic war rooms, no massive command centers filled with flashing lights and urgent activity. Just a modest desk, some bookshelves, and a window showing blue sky and white clouds. Behind the desk sat Secretary General Hannah Park, looking exactly like what she was, a middle-aged human woman in a simple business suit. She wasn't wearing military armor or surrounded by bodyguards. She didn't have weapons or threatening symbols of power. She looked like someone who might work in accounting or manage a small business. But when she spoke, her voice carried the quiet authority of someone who held the fate of worlds in her hands. "We tried to avoid this," she said, and her tone was almost apologetic, like a teacher disappointed in a student who hadn't done their homework. "Humanity learned long ago that the universe is not kind to the weak, so we made sure we never would." "Be weak again, you were warned. You chose not to listen." Admiral Korthvex stared at the screen, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. Behind Secretary General Park, through that ordinary window, he could see Earth's peaceful blue sky. She was sitting on the surface of the planet they had come to conquer, in what appeared to be a completely undefended building, calmly explaining why his fleet was about to be destroyed. The most unsettling part wasn't what she was saying, but how she was saying it. There was no anger in her voice, no hatred or desire for revenge. She spoke like someone explaining a simple fact of nature, like telling a child why touching a hot stove would burn their fingers. It was educational, almost kind, but absolutely final. "You see," she continued, gesturing slightly toward the window behind her, "we've been out here among the stars for a very long time, much longer than your intelligence report suggested. We've met species like yours before. We know how this conversation usually goes." The camera angle shifted slightly, and Korthvex realized that what he had taken for a window showing Earth's sky was actually a view of space, but not empty space. The sky was filled with ships, thousands upon thousands, of human vessels that had been invisible moments before, now revealed in all their terrifying glory. Each one was larger and more advanced than anything in the hegemony fleet. "We learned early that the universe has two kinds of civilizations," Secretary General Park said, her voice never changing from that calm, almost gentle tone. "Those that choose to be predators, and those that choose to be protectors. We chose protection, but to protect the innocent, sometimes you have to be more dangerous than the predators." She leaned forward slightly, and for the first time, Admiral Korthvex saw something frightening in her eyes. Not anger or hatred, but the absolute certainty of someone who had never lost a fight. The space around the solar system exploded with light as thousands of new contacts suddenly appeared on every alien sensor screen. What had looked like empty space just seconds before was now filled with the largest fleet Admiral Korthvex had ever seen in his entire military career. The human ships didn't gradually emerge or slowly power up. They simply materialized all at once, as if someone had flipped a switch and made the invisible visible. Each human vessel was a masterpiece of engineering that made the hegemony's most advanced warships look like children's toys. The smallest, human destroyer was larger than Korthvex's own flagship, and their battleships were so massive that they had their own gravitational fields. The alien sensors couldn't even properly measure some of the larger vessels because they extended beyond the maximum range of their scanning equipment. The ships didn't look anything like what the hegemony had expected from a primitive species. Instead of crude metal hulls held together with bolts and welding, the human vessels appeared to be grown rather than built. Their surfaces flowed like liquid mercury, constantly shifting and adapting. Some ships seemed to be made of pure energy, held together by forces that shouldn't exist. Others looked like they had been carved from single pieces of exotic matter that glowed with their own inner light. Admiral Day Kim's flagship was positioned directly between the alien fleet and Earth, and it was so enormous that it blocked out entire sections of stars. The ship was beautiful in a terrifying way, its hull covered in patterns that seemed to move and change when you looked at them directly. Weapon ports that could have swallowed entire hegemony cruisers lined its sides, and at its center was something that made space itself bend around it. The alien tactical officer was frantically trying to count the human ships, but the numbers kept changing. Every time he thought he had an accurate count, more vessels would decloak or emerge from what looked like folded space. The human fleet seemed to stretch from one edge of the solar system to the other, with ships positioned at every major gravitational point. What shocked Korthvex most wasn't just the size of the human fleet, but its organization. These weren't random ships thrown together for defense. This was a carefully planned formation that had obviously been in position for a long time. The humans had been watching and waiting, letting the hegemony fleet walk into what was essentially a perfectly designed trap. The aliens finally understood the horrible truth. Earth wasn't a primitive backwater planet defended by a few space stations. It was the forward operating base of an interstellar empire that spanned galaxies. Those primitive orbital installations they had dismissed were just the tip of an iceberg so massive that they couldn't see its true size. The human fleet hung in space like a constellation of deadly stars, each one capable of destroying entire worlds. And they had all been there the entire time, invisible and patient, waiting for the hegemony to make their choice. Secretary General. Park's face remained calm on the main screen as she continued speaking, but now Admiral Korthvex could see something new in her expression. It wasn't cruelty or anger. It was the look of a teacher who was about to give a very important lesson that she hoped would never need to be repeated. "Since you chose not to listen to words," she said quietly, "perhaps a demonstration will help you understand." As she spoke, a single human ship began moving toward the alien flagship. It wasn't particularly large by human standards, about the size of a hegemony cruiser, but there was something unsettling about the way it moved through space. It didn't use visible engines or leave any kind of trail. It simply glided forward like a shark moving through dark water. Admiral Korthvex immediately ordered his weapons to target the approaching vessel, but something impossible happened. Every time his gunners tried to lock onto the human ship, their targeting systems simply couldn't see it. The sensors showed it was there, but the weapons acted as if they were trying to shoot at empty space. It was as if the ship existed and didn't exist at the same time. The human vessel came to a stop, just a few hundred meters away from the massive alien dreadnought. This close, Korthvex could see that it wasn't made of metal like his ships. The hull seemed to be made of something that shifted and flowed like liquid, but held its shape perfectly. Strange patterns of light moved across its surface in ways that hurt to look at directly. Then the demonstration began, and it was more terrifying than any battle Korthvex had ever witnessed. The human ship didn't fire weapons or launch missiles. Instead, beams of soft blue light reached out from it and gently touched the alien vessel's hull. Wherever the light touched, the hegemony's most advanced armor simply ceased to exist. Not melted, not blown apart, not damaged. It just stopped being there, leaving perfectly smooth holes behind. The alien crew watched in growing horror as their massive plasma cannons, weapons that could destroy cities, were carefully and precisely removed from their ship. The human beams would touch a weapon mount, and the entire cannon would simply vanish, leaving behind a circular opening that was so perfectly cut it looked like it had been designed that way. Their missile launchers disappeared next, then their defensive shields, then their main engines. Each system was removed with surgical precision, like a doctor carefully removing pieces from a patient. The human ship worked methodically around the alien vessel, taking apart their ability to fight or flee without harming a single crew member. The most disturbing part was how gentle it all looked. There were no explosions, no sparks, no emergency alarms. The alien ship was being systematically dismantled, but it felt more like watching someone carefully take apart a clock than witnessing an act of war. When it was over, the mighty hegemony dreadnought hung helpless in space, completely unable to fight back or escape, but with every single crew member safe and unharmed. Admiral Korthvex sat in his command chair, staring at the holes where his ship's weapons used to be. His entire fleet was now completely helpless, floating in space like sitting ducks. Every single vessel had been systematically disarmed by the human ships, with the same gentle precision that had dismantled his flagship. Not one alien had been killed, but their ability to fight had been completely removed. This was the moment Korthvex had been dreading. In his long military career, he had seen what happened when a conquering fleet was defeated. The victors usually celebrated by destroying every enemy ship and killing every survivor. It was the way of war throughout the galaxy. The strong survived, the weak died, and mercy was seen as a weakness that got you killed. He closed his eyes and waited for the end. The human ships had weapons that could erase matter from existence. They could have vaporized his entire fleet in seconds. Instead, they had chosen to spare his crews while making it impossible for them to fight back. Now came the massacre that would teach the galaxy what happened to those who threatened humanity. But the massacre never came. Secretary General Park's face was still on his main screen, and when she spoke again, her voice carried the same calm tone it had throughout this entire encounter. There was no triumph in her expression, no joy at having defeated a superior force. If anything, she looked slightly sad, like someone who had hoped things could have ended differently. "You came to conquer Earth," she said, "and we gave you one chance to turn back. That chance has passed, but we are not the monsters you expected us to be." She paused, looking directly into the camera, as if she could see through the screen to the alien bridge, where Korthvex sat in stunned silence. "We offer you the same choice we offered before," she continued. "Leave our space and never return. Your ships will be repaired enough to reach hegemony territory safely. Your weapons will remain offline until you cross back into your own borders. Your crews will be given food and medical supplies for the journey home." Korthvex couldn't believe what he was hearing. Mercy was one thing, but this was something else entirely. The humans weren't just sparing their lives, they were offering to help them get home safely. It was the most alien concept he had ever encountered, and it terrified him more than any weapon could have. "Tell your leaders," Secretary General Park said, "that humanity offers trade, diplomacy, and friendship to those who approach us in peace, to those who come as conquerors." She gestured toward the disabled alien fleet floating helplessly around her planet. "Well, you've seen what happens to them. The choice, as always, is yours." The transmission ended, leaving the alien bridge in complete silence. For the first time in his life, Admiral Korthvex had encountered something more frightening than death. A species powerful enough to destroy you, but wise enough to choose mercy instead. The journey back to hegemony space was the longest and most humbling experience of Admiral Korthvex's life. His once mighty fleet crawled through the void at reduced speed, their engines barely functional and their weapon systems completely dead. But their sensors worked perfectly, and Korthvex knew this wasn't an accident. The humans wanted them, to see everything on their way out. As the disabled fleet limped away from Earth, the alien crews got their first real look at the true scope of human civilization. What they had mistaken for empty space was actually filled with invisible structures and hidden installations, mining operations that spanned entire asteroid belts, manufacturing stations that could build fleets of ships in the time it took to cross a single star system, defense networks that stretched from one end of the galaxy to the other. The humans had been everywhere, watching everything, for much longer than anyone had imagined. They hadn't just recently discovered space travel. They had been out among the stars for thousands of years, building an empire so vast and sophisticated that other species had never even noticed it existed. Every day of the long journey home brought new revelations. The alien sensors detected human ships shadowing them from a distance, not as threats but as escorts, making sure they reached hegemony territory safely. True to their word, the humans provided food and medical supplies whenever the fleet needed them. They even helped repair damaged life support systems when one of the smaller ships suffered a critical failure. Commander Shin Lee, the human officer, assigned to oversee their journey, spoke to Admiral Korthvex regularly through secured communications. She was professional and courteous, treating him not as a defeated enemy, but as someone who had simply made a mistake and was now being given a chance to correct it. Her tactical analysis of the encounter was shared freely with the alien command staff, and it painted a picture that changed everything. The report showed that humanity had been aware of the hegemony fleet long before it entered the solar system. They had tracked every ship, analyzed every weapon, and prepared countermeasures for every possible strategy the aliens might use. The entire invasion had been allowed to proceed exactly as far as the humans wanted it to go. It hadn't been a battle at all. It had been a controlled demonstration, but the most important part of Commander Lee's analysis wasn't about technology or tactics. It was about philosophy. She explained that the most dangerous civilizations in the galaxy weren't the ones that destroyed their enemies. Those were just bullies with big weapons. The truly dangerous species were the ones that were powerful enough to annihilate you completely, but wise enough to choose mercy instead. When the hegemony fleet finally crossed back into their own territory, Admiral Korthvex carried with him a message that would spread to every corner of the galaxy. Earth wasn't a primitive world to be conquered. It was the capital of an empire that had learned the most important lesson in the universe. True strength wasn't measured by your ability to destroy, but by your willingness to spare those who couldn't defend themselves.